If you're optimizing your Shopify store, you need to take into account the LCP. You've probably seen this on your Google Insight report right here. So at this point, you might be wondering, what is LCP? How does it affect me? How do I find it? How do I optimize it? And I'm gonna show you all of this in the next minutes. Okay, so Google is trying to figure out how fast your site is. So the most logical thing they came up with was, why don't we calculate the time it takes for the biggest element on your page to show? So basically that just means you go to any website and just look at the biggest element you can see. Often that's an image, maybe that's a text block, and Google kind of figured out, well, how long does it take for that biggest element to load? And since it's the biggest element, it's probably a good reference to how fast the site itself loads. Which, alright, I'm following the logic here. Now there is a catch and it gets a bit tricky, but we'll get to that in a second. But in short, LCP is Largest Contentful Paint. How fast does the biggest element on your website load? The biggest element that you can see with your eyes. No witchcraft here. Okay, so now we know what LCP is. How important is it into optimizing your site? Well, it's pretty important. Right here we have all of the values that it takes for version 8, and you can see that LCP, Largest Contentful Paint, is about 25% of the score on mobile and a full 25 on desktop. So LCP is really important into optimizing your store. The next question you're probably asking is, okay, how can I find my LCP? Is it as simple as just going to the site and seeing, okay, this right here in the back, that image is the biggest element? That must be my LCP? Well, kind of. Not really. You see, when we take Grades.example, which is a Shopify brand, no affiliation to it, you would say that that entire background with that little movie clip playing, that's the biggest thing you see. And so you could easily be thinking, that's my largest contentful paint. That's my biggest block here. What's going to be the time between me going to the website and that video started playing? The thing is that Google tries it in a little bit of a different way. Google obviously can't see the website, they just scrape the code, and so they guess what the largest contentful paint is. And in this case, it's going to be this text block right here, free tote bag with that full text below it. That entire section is actually going to be the largest contentful paint. Let me show you how you find that. On Google Chrome, you just right-click, inspect. Then you're going to have this little inspector tool that's going to show up right here. And then you're going to go to performance and you're just going to click a little refresh right here. It's going to load for a second and it's going to load every single element of the website. And then it's going to clearly tell you which element Google thinks your largest contentful paint is. Just give it a couple seconds and we'll see. Okay, so now it's done the entire report. It's loading and pulling it up. And once the report is fully loaded, you can clearly see right here the LCP. And if you hover over it, it's going to tell you exactly which one it is. So that's kind of useful. If you click on it, you will also get all the additional information. So this is how you find your LCP. You also have a Chrome extension that could be pretty useful for detecting your LCP and which element you actually have to improve. Now there's one tricky thing to be aware of though. We just did this test on a website that I already visited. Now, there is a whole bunch of things cached and my cookies are already active, meaning let's say that you have a pop-up that just shows to the first time you visit a website. That pop-up, we didn't see that pop-up right now, but it's fair to assume that that pop-up would be the biggest thing once on load. An example of this pop-up would be Decathlon. When you go to Decathlon, it asks you, it blocks everything else, and there is a pop-up above it, as you can see, that asks you which site you want to enter. Now this pop-up became the largest contentful paint because it's the only thing you can see, right? It's the biggest element. The thing is that you, as a developer or a user or store owner, you might not see this anymore because you've constantly go and visit and you forgot there is a pop-up that actually shows up. While Google PageSpeed Insight, they just do the test. They come and crawl your site for the first time. They see the big pop-up and they say, yep, that's the biggest thing. It loaded at the very end of the full load. The pop-up took at the very end. When everything was loaded, it popped up. So that's the Largest Contentful Paint. It is really slow. This is a bad website. So this is why a quick tip, you really want your pop-ups to only show up after the user started interacting with your page so that the Google page bot won't see this pop-up and won't count it as a Largest Contentful Paint. So at this time, you might be wondering, okay, Andrew, how can I improve my loading time of my Largest Contentful Paint or LCP? Well, what you want to do is you want to identify that block, your LCP, that you know what you have to improve. And then number two is you want to make sure that that element gets loaded as high up. So you don't want any apps loading before that. You don't want the Instagram app that you use in the footer to load before your LCP. No, you want that one to load all the way to the back of the sequence. You want to make sure that you put your LCP at the very top of your loading sequence. That way, when a user comes and visits your website, boom, your LCP pops up as one of the first thing and you're good to go. I hope this makes sense. And if you need any site speed optimization, go to ecomexperts.io. We have your back.